People came here to avoid war in Europe.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're looking at some events in human history with the highest death tolls.
The plague is caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis, and most of the time humans get it from a flea bite.
The Second Sino-Japanese War.
They collect all the dead bodies from the poor people because it's very cold, and they were died. Because of the cold, they collect them.
While many think of events in Europe in the lead up to World War II, what happened in the East was just as detrimental. Japan and China had been locked in a series of conflicts with one another following the 1931 invasion of Manchuria. Things escalated in 1937 when Japan officially invaded and took Nanjing, perpetrating a massacre along with it.
1889 Meiji Constitution specified that the emperor was the commander of the Army and Navy.
The Second Sino-Japanese War was extremely bloody, leading to an excess of deaths. Many were caused by chemical and biological warfare, ranging from gas to fleas infected with the bubonic plague. Although the exact numbers are not known, some experts have estimated that 20 million people died during the 8-year conflict, with the majority on the Chinese side.
One reason he goes for Shanghai rather than North China, because the focus of the Japanese effort is in North China. They don't have any business. They really don't want to be fighting in Shanghai.
The Qing dynasty conquest of the Ming dynasty. One group maintaining power for centuries doesn't make them indestructible. The Ming dynasty ruled for centuries in China, but they still eventually fell to the up-and-coming Qing line. The transfer of power took decades, with several battles happening in the interim that helped lead to an estimated 25 million fatalities. Several massacres were carried out, leading to the devastation of whole provinces. One rebel alone is attributed with killing between 600,000 and 6 million civilians. Combat wasn't the only contributing factor when it came to fatalities. Disease and famine also caused it to increase drastically. Although the Qing ultimately came out on top, they would meet a similar end in 1912, proving just how cyclical history is. The Plague of Justinian. Yersinia pestis has been one of the most insidious killers in human history, having caused several plagues. The Plague of Justinian began in 541 AD and quickly swept through the entire Mediterranean basin, Europe, and both the Sasanian and Byzantine empires. One historian, Procopius, claimed that so many were dying in Constantinople that they couldn't all be buried, leading them to be stacked on top of one another. He also asserted that 10,000 people were dying per day in the Byzantine Empire alone, with an overall death toll that ranged from 15 to 100 million. While the exact amount has not been and may never be confirmed, it was still a sign of the damage the disease would cause in the future. The Spanish flu.
They would begin to have hemorrhaging in their lungs, an edema in the lungs, so their lungs would begin to fill with their own bodily fluids, which would mean that literally people would be kind of drowning in their own fluids.
Disease is horrible enough on its own, but it becomes downright horrific when it spreads across the globe in just a couple of years. The Spanish flu first broke out in the United States in 1918. By 1920, over 1/3 of the world had been infected, with tens of millions succumbing to the illness. World War I did not help, with overcrowded medical camps and poor hygiene exacerbating the spread.
On an unprecedented scale, during World War I, young men are on the move in cramped, overcrowded conditions, which is an absolute dream for influenza virus.
Larger countries, such as India, lost about 5% of their population to the illness. After several waves and an estimated mortality rate as high as 100 million, things finally began to settle down in 1920. Although we haven't completely eradicated the flu, vaccines have helped ensure that it doesn't reach that level.
They did early social distancing. They closed saloons and public gatherings. They closed down the schools and churches. They asked people to stay away from one another.
The Lushan Rebellion. What started out as an attempt to overthrow the Tang government in one area of China escalated into an all-out multi-year civil war. It began in 755, with the rogue Yan dynasty vying for power. With Lushan at the helm, they invaded several areas, causing mass loss. Several leaders, including Lushan, met their own grisly deaths, but it didn't do much to end their efforts. The conflict raged on for 8 years, with the Tang dynasty coming out on top. Later censuses revealed that the population had dropped from almost 53 million in 755 to just under 17 million in 764. Natural citizens were not the only ones affected. Several foreign merchants were targeted, and a massacre was ordered against West Asian Sogdians. World War I.
And people ask why. Why doesn't America get involved immediately? And American politicians are petrified of being drawn into a foreign war and fighting for foreign ends.
When practically the entire world is engaged in a battle, there's bound to be a high death rate. But the final results from World War I are still shocking to see. Breaking out in 1914 following the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, World War I soon proved to be different from any other fought before it.
People came here to avoid war in Europe.
The use of high-powered weaponry and trench warfare made taking lives far easier, causing the mortality rate to skyrocket. As many as 22 million people died, with a majority being lost in battle. When things finally came to a close in 1918, no one at the time could have guessed they'd be back in the same position just over 20 years later.
And yet, within a year after winning that election, that very same president is declaring war on the German.
The Great Chinese Famine.
We woke up in the middle of night because in the morning we are going to walk through Tiananmen Square to see our great leader. It was exciting. We thought he was a god.
It may have only spanned 2 years, but it's still one of the deadliest and cruelest events in modern history. Mao Zedong's controversial Great Leap Forward had several policies that led to the mass famine, including a poor distribution of food and ordering many people to work in iron and steel production rather than farming.
Teachers were the target of the political campaign. Mao taught us they have to receive the re-education by the worker and peasant.
This led to a widespread food shortage that forced people to take desperate measures, including eating soil, grass, and in some cases, even other humans. Several estimates of death have been made, with one source asserting that 55 million people perished as a result of the famine, making it one of the worst human-made disasters to date. The Black Death.
The plague is caused by a bacteria called Yersinia pestis, and most of the time humans get it from a flea bite.
When the aforementioned Yersinia pestis ravaged ancient empires, none could have guessed it would continue to rear its ugly head throughout history. One of the worst instances occurred in the 1300s. Trading culture at the time made transmission much easier, with rats and fleas being two of the biggest suspected carriers of the disease.
Plague could get into people's blood and it could turn their limbs black, and that's where we get the term Black Death.
The exact numbers are not known, but several guesses have been made. Europe took the biggest hit, with 30 to 60% of their population succumbing to the disease. This led to mass burials taking place, some of which consisted of thousands of bodies. Some Italian cities were so greatly affected that they didn't regain their lost population until the 19th century, proving just how detrimental the bacteria truly was.
Now, before there were antibiotics, the plague would kill between 66 and 93% of people who got it. Now, with antibiotics, that mortality rate goes down to about 16%.
New World Smallpox.
Some historians say that 90% of all indigenous deaths, which were considerable in those years of the conquest, were attributable to smallpox.
The colonization of the Americas was disastrous for indigenous populations for several reasons. One of the worst was their sudden exposure to diseases they'd never been in contact with before. Their lack of natural immunity made the contraction of diseases like smallpox much easier and much more deadly.
Cortez writes about the bodies piled up in the streets and the odor being so bad that he can't actually stand walking through the streets. So we're not really sure what the mortality rate was, but it was certainly very high.
Some tribes were so heavily affected that they faced total extinction. Iroquois tribes in Quebec suffered through a staggering 24 epidemics, nearly all of which were caused by smallpox. Some settlers were aware of the effects. One commander even gave infected items as a gift, with the hope of indigenous people contracting it. To this day, remaining communities have never received an apology for the deaths inflicted upon them through contagion.
The Spanish were thinking of this disease, that they actually had a theory of the disease. They actually had an idea that it had to be transmitted by people who didn't have immunity, and that something new was going on here.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. World War II. World War I was extremely violent, but the hate-fueled cruelty in the following global war was somehow even worse. Leaders like Mussolini and Hitler both fanned the flames of brutality, resulting in an assumed total of between 70 and 85 million individuals perishing on all sides. Civilian deaths vastly outnumbered military ones. From Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor to the United States' retaliation with nuclear weaponry, several countries went to extreme lengths. The most horrific event by far was the Holocaust, a mass genocide that led to the demise of roughly 78% of the Jewish population in Germany-controlled Europe, along with as many as 11 million other victims. World War II is considered the deadliest military conflict in history. Which mass death event do you find the most chilling? Let us know in the comments below.
I hope that they reflect, they regret, they re-examine. What should we prevent this kind of human tragedy happen again?
Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.